Don't be scared. Don't be scared.
A little backstory about this creature. The Tsul'kalu is a Bigfoot-like creature that can hear and control your thoughts. Now let's hear my friend's story. Caution contains nudity. I'm a 19-year-old, full-blooded Cherokee Indian boy who lives in Ashe County, West Virginia. It's starting to get dark, and that's when the deer are most active, so I got ready for my hunting trip out in the forest with some friends from my tribe. So we hiked out onto the trail to my hunting stand/tree house, which was deep into the forest. The sound of the crickets filled our ears as we walked along. We reached it and climbed up onto it. I activated the feeder, which tipped corn onto the ground. My friend Kenai, who was slightly taller than me with a big, heavy-set body, told me he needed to go to the bathroom, so he climbed down and headed to the forest. We sat there until a big herd of deer appeared, with a few good bucks. While they were feeding, I lined up my bow, and when I was about to shoot, the deer lifted their heads and took off running, kicking out airy marvins of dirt. I heard big footsteps coming to the stand. I looked out and saw a tall shadow at the feeder, too tall and human-like to be a bear. It stomped out of view. Another thing I noticed is Kenai hadn't came back from his toilet break. As a concerned friend, we began calling his name. Then I heard Kenai scream close by. We jumped down and headed to the sound. We found Kenai nude and holding up a totem pole. Under a trance, he dropped the totem pole and tried to run, but we pinned him down until he was out of whatever trance he was in. He sat up really shaking. He was shaking so much his stomach was wobbling. Tsul'kalu, 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 he repeated over and over and over. We ended the hunt, helped Kenai to his feet, and got out of there. Since that incident happened, Kenai is so shaken up, he's given up hunting. A little backstory about this creature. The Tsul'kalu is a Bigfoot-like creature that can hear and control your thoughts. Now let's hear my friend's story. Caution contains nudity. I'm a 19-year-old, full-blooded Cherokee Indian boy who lives in Ashe County, West Virginia. It's starting to get dark, and that's when the deer are most active, so I got ready for my hunting trip out in the forest with some friends from my tribe. So we hiked out onto the trail to my hunting stand/tree house, which was deep into the forest. The sound of the crickets filled our ears as we walked along. We reached it and climbed up onto it. I activated the feeder, which tipped corn onto the ground. My friend Kenai, who was slightly taller than me with a big, heavy-set body, told me he needed to go to the bathroom, so he climbed down and headed to the forest. We sat there until a big herd of deer appeared, with a few good bucks. While they were feeding, I lined up my bow, and when I was about to shoot, the deer lifted their heads and took off running, kicking out airy marvins of dirt. I heard big footsteps coming to the stand. I looked out and saw a tall shadow at the feeder, too tall and human-like to be a bear. It stomped out of view. Another thing I noticed is Kenai hadn't came back from his toilet break. As a concerned friend, we began calling his name. Then I heard Kenai scream close by. We jumped down and headed to the sound. We found Kenai nude and holding up a totem pole. Under a trance, he dropped the totem pole and tried to run, but we pinned him down until he was out of whatever trance he was in. He sat up really shaking. He was shaking so much his stomach was wobbling. Tsul'kalu, 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 he repeated over and over and over. We ended the hunt, helped Kenai to his feet, and got out of there. Since that incident happened, Kenai is so shaken up, he's given up hunting. So this is a story my friend told me, so I don't have perfect detail. For some background knowledge, he's 15-year-old to this day, and back then he was only 10 when the incident happened. This incident took place in Missouri. He said that this is by far the creepiest thing he has ever seen in his whole life, and was sure of it. Let's begin. It was a while ago, back in 2017, when he was hunting with his grandfather. They were out in the woods around 9 p.m. He had his BB gun with him in case they spotted a deer. He walked around a good amount of time, and then he smelled this horrid scent. Something was horribly stinky. He described it as if a skunk spray, but multiple times worse. He wondered what it was and followed the scent, but he couldn't find the source of it. This deeply concerned him, wondering what it came from. Then the scent got stronger and stronger until it was impossibly bad. Then the scent just simply evaporated. He then noticed with his grandfather, everything went completely silent. There wasn't a single sound to be heard. That's when it hit him. He knew that complete silence in the wilderness means there's a big predator nearby. He wandered around when out of the corner of his eye he saw something big shift quickly. He told his grandfather, but he didn't believe him and thought he was hallucinating. But my friend knew it was not a hallucination. From then on, they kept walking around trying to find a deer, when they both saw something huge pass by fast, and his grandfather had a remarkable look on his face. It was the face of true terror, because he knew what that was. But his grandfather knew that it would be too much for my friend, so he just told him that it was an overgrown deer, not trying to scare him. Now, they were close to the very middle of the woods when they heard this horrible screech. He described it to me to be like an elk and a woman's scream combined to create this sound. He then sworn that he saw this big, very pale creature with antlers on its head, with little fur patches, and it was mainly skin. That was all he could make out before it ran away quicker than anything he'd ever seen in his whole life. From that point forward, he was running home, but his grandfather couldn't easily catch up. They both escaped in the end, but they knew what they had encountered. He also said he could have sworn it stared at him as he stared at it. He said it had reddish orange eyes glowing in the moonlight. He said he thought it was a wendigo, and so did his grandfather. They both now know not to venture into the woods that late at night. My friend also said that he had seen it once more in a bush in front of his house, and it made this weird look at him and ran right off into the trees, looked back at my friend, and then continued off into the woods. Thank you so much for reading this story, as it took a while to write out. I hope you enjoy this story as much as it freaked me out.
I am a 32-year-old male, married, and I have 2 children. This encounter happened in mid-August of 2022. My wife was tending to our newborn daughter while my son and I were sitting on the front porch of our house. It was about sunset, and my son Brandon and I were watching the sunset over our property. It was about 8:55 p.m. when Brandon and I were looking at the stars that lit the night sky, and Brandon says, "That smell is terrible." I was about to ask him what smell, but then I smelled it too. It smelled like rotten eggs and a dead person combined, if that makes sense. Then Brandon and I hear this blood-cold howl, the howl so loud that my wife came out, and she came out about 2 feet from where I was standing, and she froze. And she said, "Oh my God, what is that?" I look in my wife's direction and I see it too, but before I could do anything, Brandon screams and runs into the house. Standing before my wife and I was a 7-foot-tall, half-man, half-wolf beast. It stood on its hind legs and looked at us. Its eyes were glowing yellow and it was covered in brown fur. It howled right at my wife, and she looked at me and took off into the night. I look at my wife and say, "What was that?" My wife looks at me and said, "It looked like a werewolf." I believe that my wife is right. What we saw that night was a werewolf. I haven't seen it since that mid-August night, but if I ever do see it again, I will put a bullet in it. Well, it's looking like another sleepless night in a mile-high city. So, throw another log on the fire, boil up a hot pot of tea, cuddle up and cozy down. We're about to keep this cryptid ball rolling. Now, this is minus the narrative component, but more or less a limited zoological classification of sorts. Also, before I get started, I would encourage you to normalize talking about these things. You're a truly ignorant soul if you really think we know jack about our own planet. We are a relatively new and seemingly clueless species here. All it takes is to fly over the West to get an understanding of just how vast this region truly is. Nowadays, it's one of the first things I'll mention or ask someone new. Like, "Oh, you're from Jersey. Have you ever seen the Jersey Devil?" Or, "Oh, you're from Michigan. Ever seen the Dog Man?" "Oh, you're from Louisiana. Ever seen the Rougarou?" Anyway, you get the gist. Typically, folks will just laugh it off, and if nothing else, it's a great way to break the ice. But you will get the 1 in about 10 who will look you dead in the eye, trying to get a gauge if you're joking or not. And when they see that you're not, and you're actually asking, they will share their tale. And that's not something that will just happen spontaneously. Also, I should note that aliens, ET, UFOs, and government MK Ultra phenomenon are their own thing, and ghosts, ghouls, goblins, poltergeists, and disembodied spirits, demons, etc. all belong to the realm of the paranormal. Cryptozoology is a pseudoscience and subculture that aims to prove the existence of entities from the folklore record, such as Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Yeti, the Chupacabra, Jersey Devil, or the Mokele Membe. Cryptozoologists refer to these entities as cryptid, a term coined by the subculture. Okay, so here we go with some of the rarer sorts, and the scariest one to me. 1. Giant spiders said to live in the cliffs and caves high in the canyons around the Four Corners area, notably Spider Rock and Canyon de Shelly. I posted before about Spider-Woman, so I won't go into much detail here, but if you've ever seen or read Lord of the Rings, you'll have a pretty good idea of just how terrifying this notion of giant spiders can be. Number 2. Little people, ranging from the Indian in the cupboard to leprechaun size. The Dean, Navajo people, have long cohabited with these little dudes, who even accompanied the tribe along with the Kit Carson Trail of Tears, and emerged from Carson's camp, after which Hitler later modeled his own camps, likewise Christianized. Also, my 4th grade teacher saw a leprechaun in Ireland. She said it was sitting up in a tree and actually waved to her. Not particularly scary, but they might freak you out if a dog or cat accidentally flushes one out and it runs across your living room. 3. Aquatic humanoids. Not mermaids, but more like those creatures from The Descent. Pretty freaky and also known to pull people down into the murkish depths, never to resurface again. 4. Small velociraptor-like reptiles that run around the dry washes and hollers of Arizona and the Southwest. Watch out for those little guys. Think Lost World, Jurassic Park. 5. Well-known, but not typically thought of in this way, gargoyles as seen in the 1994 cartoon of the same name. Need I say more? Could be connected in some way to the New Jersey Devil. 6. Sea serpents. Again, everybody knows about Nessie, but many other freshwater lakes boast of similar sea serpent sightings. I myself has a story to tell, but that's for another post. These creatures are ancient and likely survived the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs by living deep in the water. They travel by way of underwater tunnels, are mostly aquatic, but do have arms and legs and occasionally come up on land. They have a sort of camouflage that makes them look like mossy driftwood, but do not be fooled. These beings are more than capable of murder, if it can be considered as such, and it has happened at least one time that I'm aware of, though that's again another story for another post, as they mainly like to prey on smaller birds and deer and whatnot. After my encounter in Washington, I asked a friend who grew up out there, and without missing a beat, he said, "Oh yeah, we used to tie up goats by the water so they would eat them and let us swim and go out in the water. I think they are highly intelligent and prefer to fly, or rather, swim under the radar, although there are thousands of sightings all over the world." 7. Lucky number 7, and the final one for this evening, as my battery is running low and I'm actually getting pretty tired now. But without further ado, Thunderbird, a huge bird-like creature with a wingspan of roughly 20 to 30 feet or so, whose flapping wings resemble the sound, if not the very power, of thunder itself. Not to be confused with Birdman or other winged reptilians. That's right, just like the David Icke conspiracy theory. But, quote, "The Thunderbird is a legendary creature in certain North America indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is considered a supernatural being of power and strength. It is especially important and frequently depicted in the art, song, and oral histories of many Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but is also found in various forms among some peoples of the American Southwest, East Coast, Great Lakes, and Great Plains. In modern times, it has achieved notoriety as a purported cryptid alongside the likes of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. American science historian and folklorist Adrian Mayor and British historian Tom Holland have both suggested that indigenous Thunderbird stories are based on discoveries of the pterosaur fossils by Native Americans. However, it has also been noted that despite variations, the common design elements of the motif within different tribal groups across the continent appear distinct from the makeup of the suggested prehistoric flying reptile, such as an eagle or a raptor-like avian, feathered wings and tail, along with vastly different head shape, perhaps with the exception of some Pacific Northwest imagery." End quote. Wikipedia. Now, this is in no way a comprehensive list, and we will surely keep this ball rolling. Please continue in the comments section, but these are just a few that come to mind at this late hour. Good night and good luck.